Imagine somebody told you that the entire fate of your world rests in the hands of whether or not a single box gets opened. And then you'll have the events that have been going down in Prisma Illya. What is up, guys? We have been bouncing all over the place, but one part of the fate verse that I rarely see people talk about is all of the recent events that's been going down in the Illya verse. And the scarcity of it is just appalling because it's really some of the best writing out there. So we're going to get into Pandora's box. Yes, that same Pandora's box from Greek mythology, and how Darius Ainsworths was able to wipe an entire timeline by using it. First of all, there's so many things to unpack that I gotta rewind it back a bit. And as I looked around, I noticed that a lot of people don't truly understand Zokin's true goal for obtaining the Holy Grail over in Stay Night. Many people really believe that his main goal was immortality, when in fact his real goal was to wipe all the evils of the world. And we had a whole video covering that. It was the video I did covering the whole first Holy Grail war, how the Makiri and the Ainsworths came together and they really saw eye to eye on their destination, so they decided to work together. And then you have the Ainsworths who wanted to recreate the third magic, materialize the soul, and create a utopia, something that Zokin was completely down for. The reason why this is important is because the Illya verse plays on different aspects of the main timeline and even merges them together, and I'll tell you why. Darius Ainsworths, who is the main antagonist of everything that's going down, initially it was no different from everybody else. He was a mere magus, and in one of his ventures he just so happened to discover Pandora. Now if you don't know Pandora, she is the very first human that was created by the Greek pantheon. She was created by the god Hephaestus under the orders of Zeus, because if you remember, Prometheus stole fire from the gods, and so Zeus decided to make an equal punishment by sending out Pandora. Now why is she such a punishment? Well, he just so happened to send her with a jar full of goodies, the Pythos. This was the original Pandora's box in the myth. The thing about the Pythos is that it's described to house tons of blessings and fortunate things. However, these blessings are also mended together with all the evils of the world, and so the jar was never to be opened under any circumstance. It's just like the story of Genesis. You put this item in front of a human and tell them under no circumstance are you supposed to do this with said item, and then they just go off and do it anyway. And we literally just talked about this and how the idle mind can be one of the most dangerous things possible. He knew that Pandora was gonna open the box. That's why he did it. So she opens it up, and when she does this, she releases all of the evils upon the world. Sickness, famine, violence, disease, madness, everything. And this will be the beginning of strife among mankind. Now you have Prisma Illya bringing this character into the verse and following that same concept. Darius meets up with Pandora and he finds that the humans actually tried to bury her. They tried to get rid of her. But the thing about Pandora is that she's immortal. Since she is the actual first human, her actual death is conceptually inside the box. So unless the box is open, she can't die. And in the fate timelines, the box hasn't been open yet. And because of this, she's been around for at least 6 millenniums. Now the thing about this is that she actually wants to go, because of the fact that she released these evils and she's watching the humans go through all this and they're cursing her for it. On top of that, can't grow acquainted with people because their life is gonna end anyway. Her entire life has been misery. But with her being completely unable to access this, she's stuck to watch the world repeat the same cycle over and over again. That is until she met Darius. When Darius comes to us in the story, and just to preface him, Darius is the one that's the head of the Ainsworths counterpart in the Prisma verse. You know, the Ainsworths, they're the ones that take the place of the Ainsworths in those timelines. That's why they sound so similar. It's a play on words. But But Darius, he's the one that created the class cards. He's the one that's manipulating all these shadow artifacts. And it was often posed to us that his goal aligned with something evil because he decided to capture Miyu in order to pull it off. The reality of the matter is, Darius's initial goal was to free Pandora. In his same flashback, he made it his life's mission to make sure that Pandora could see her way out of the world because he felt like the position that she had held for so long was completely unjust. And so in this verse specifically, Darius operates like numerous characters that you've seen before. He operates like Shiro, being the person that mastered Flash Air to the point where he took his displacement magecraft to the highest level, something that everybody believed that he couldn't do because his magecraft was looked at as ineffective on that level. The same thing that Shiro did with his projections. He operates like Zoken because he too is a character that achieved limited immortality. He can just keep coming back to life, but in a completely different method. And the reason being is because of his displacement magecraft. In the verse, Pandora's box is synonymous with the greater grail. It serves to be just that powerful. And so by using his displacement magecraft, he was actually able to displace his own soul inside of the box and essentially turn himself into a heroic spirit. And that way he can now body hop as much as he wants to because the box is just sending out a copy, the same way the Throne of Heroes just sends out a copy of the spirits. So even if you were to eliminate the current body that Darius is in, it's only a copy of the record that's being contained in the box. And eventually he would just come back to life in the host of his choosing. He would nurture himself inside of their conscience and then eventually take over them the same way that he did Julian. Julian now being one of his descendants. But just like Zoken, this didn't come without a flaw. And that's why the immortality is limited. Every time he comes back to life, it slowly diminishes who he once was. And the vision, the path to what he wanted, which was to save Pandora, becomes more and more unclear. And this is the exact same thing that happened to Zoken. Zoken didn't want immortality at first. He just figured that he needed it to reach the goal, which we can also see through Darius. And then he operates like the Ainsworths, the same way that they wanted to recreate the third magic and create this utopia for humanity. Darius has gotten access to some events that we don't know about. And because of this, he wants to change the future of his timeline. He wants to become the creator or God himself, which by the standards of the Grail War would essentially take the same efforts as what the Ainsworths had to put in. Over a millennium worth of foundation. So this is the part where we get to him erasing the entire timeline. The Prismaverse operates on two parallel worlds. Technically two timelines. One is Illya's timeline and the other is Miyu's timeline. Miyu was born under unique conditions with her being a child of God. And because of this, she was able to manifest miracles all the way up until the time that she was 6 years old. So in the Miyu timeline, which is the timeline that Darius comes from, he spent the first 4 Grail Wars trying to open up the box and being unsuccessful every time. By the time that the 4th rolls around, he creates a huge explosion that nearly took out Fuyuki until Shiro found Miyu. She has these wish granting abilities and is able to block out the damage that Darius had caused and stop the city from completely being consumed by the shadows. The shadows, of course, coming from Pandora's box. And because of the unique conditions that Miyu had, Darius saw this and was like, wow, if I try to open it using her, it's bound to work. Because due to that child of God concept, she functions like a lesser grail counterpart. The same way Illya also functioned as a lesser grail. It's all mirrored. So in that same timeline, and Shiro goes over this in his flashback, and for people that seen Oath Under Snow, this is the entire scenario for the movie. Darius ends up kidnapping Miyu, locked her up in the Ainsworth castle, and he has all of these stone tablets trying to create this huge ritual unlike we've seen before. Mind you that there's 7 tablets, and on each one of these tablets are legends that's coming out of the Pythos. It's coming out of Pandora's box. But since the Greek pantheon is the one that made Pandora's box, the scale, the roof of it is limited unless he goes outside and gets a force like Miyu. So Shiro Shiro goes through what should have been the entire 5th Grail War, beats everybody in it, and he manages to save Miyu and send her over to the Illya timeline right before Darius was able to finish. The tablets are important because he was overriding them with his own legend. He was using the Greek legends as their base and then replacing them with his own. He had 5 of them completed, and then Shiro came in and stopped it. It's just like the Lesser Grail and the Greater Grail itself, right? Put it like this, the same way that Solomon was able to grant his wish when he had won with Marsberry in the FGO timeline, you don't have to complete all of the tablets the same way you don't have to fill the Grail with all of the servants in order to make the wish. If you can just fill up the Grail with 6 servants, you can make the wish, and then it would take 7 to reach Akasha, which is what most mages want. But this wasn't necessarily Darius's goal. In the most recent arc, Darius was able to bring Miyu back and use her as a catalyst to fill out the 6th tablet. Even though we had a complete showdown with him, we had one with his descendant Julian, and we had Kuro even sacrifice herself via origin bullet to dislocate his conscience from Julian, and her sacrifice was in vain. He still pulled it off. And by doing this, he was able to unleash his family's secrets using the box as a source. The mud that you see pouring out is his own bounded field being reinforced by the Pithos, and thus we have it fill the world with all of its pollution. He didn't even open it completely. The box is yet to be opened. When they pierced it, they only hit Darius's bounded field. And you'll see in the manga that the entire world has been flooded via its influence, aka all of the curses and the evils that would overrun the world from the actual myth. And that's not the only thing. Since his soul is technically in the box, he's essentially an extension of the box itself. So he can use this to summon shadow spirits that tried to get the Grail and failed, as you saw in the manga and in the show. He can summon headless giants that don't even come from this world, period. Phantasmal species. There's really no telling what could come out the box. But what we see mostly are ruined possibilities that are being used to his advantage. So considering that he erased the entire timeline, earlier in the series, the Counterforce deployed its defense mechanism, aka Gaia, and that is the character Tonica. Tonica is literally a character that's an extension of the planet. She is an incarnation of Gaia itself. She's even the one that gave us a weapon that was the only thing that was able to pierce Pandora's box effectively. And the weapon itself was so powerful that Illya couldn't even pick it up with her own hands. She had to wrap her mystic code around it and grab that to actually wield it because it was so out of her league. Given its properties, it's likely because the sword is made from the magma of the Earth's core. And conceptually, the sword is Tonica's arm itself. And this really worked in our favor because though the Greeks are a high scale, she predates them because she's an avatar of the planet itself, at least one of them. But in her container, the amount that she can help is limited. And she's mentioned that normally she would have appeared as a calamity or a higher figure herself that would have outright stopped the Ainsworths. But the loophole, the very nature of his plan, caused a lot of confliction because the worst part of his plan is still inside that box. And the planet can't detect that threat until it actually happens. And as you all know, the Counterforce only sends out as much as it needs at that current time. By the time she comes out, it's already too late. Even after helping Illya and giving her the sword that could pierce the box, they still failed. Gil talks about how everything perished. The world fell victim nigh instantly, and that entire timeline had reached a bad end. Literally erased the whole timeline. Once he got a hold of Miyu, he fuses with a colossal entity, an unnamed one that's probably from a legend, and he's actually wearing the tablets as a crown of thorns. The crown of thorns can also be seen as an allusion to Christ himself, going back into the fact that he wants to become creator. Now, when it comes to where the actual thorns came from, this is mostly thanks to him having Julian's body as a host, but we have seen him use the thorns without him. Darius's magic circuits are very unique in the sense that they've always always been portrayed as actual thorns, like they represent a tree of life in a sense. We've also seen him use this as a part of his ritual. The same way you can see Toko's magic circuits in the physical, Darius is the same way. You notice it's a common thing among people of this level. They extend from his body, he can fight with them, all types of manipulations. Julian was making high use of this as well. And so you had his soldiers, his mud giants, and his phantasmal species flood the planet, and once it was over, they just immobilized. Because though they may not agree with Darius's destination, these used to be warriors that sought out the Grail, and so they're willing to ruin the entire world in order to find it. It had gotten so bad that Gaia, or Tonica, had to ask Gil for help. She said, look man, I usually don't do this, but I might need you to do me a favor, because Gil was the only reason that Illya survived. He had picked her up on his aircraft, the Vimana. And this entire scene is a callback to the main timelines, because if you remember, this is exactly what Gil wanted. He wanted to flood the planet, so he can't help but be fascinated by the outcome. So for all the people that say this and that about him, here you have Gaia asking him for his help, when Gaia out her own mouth has said that she doesn't give a fuck about the human race. Verbatim in the manga. She said, I'm here to save the planet. That's what I do. I could care less what happens to humans. Yet she's asking a spirit of humanity for help, because again, we operate on two different accords. People like Counter Guardian Illya, the ones that serve Illya, are the ones that care about how effectively we can save humans. Gil serves as the bystander, if anything. He's the jester. We talked about that with the video that had Shakespeare and Merlin. They all play that role. Hans played that role too. He played that same role in Fate Extra CCC. He knew about Kiara's bestial nature the entire time and still helped her reach her goal, but it didn't stop him from giving us help. So considering all this, Gil was more interested in the confidence of Illya than the scope of how things were playing out. Because most people, if they saw the timeline end the way that she did, they would turn tail and be finished. But Illya said, I want to fix it anyway. Even though this timeline is literally a dead end, I want to fix it. And you should just see the way that Gil was laughing hysterically. But he said, you know what? She might have that dog in her. I guess I gotta hold it down. So considering the information she knows, Tonica brings up Gil's clairvoyance, his ability to look into the past, present, and the future. She doesn't even have to ask about it. She's already aware. And once again, Gil, being the troll he is, says that he doesn't like using it. But this is all a part of her favor. So by combining her authority from the planet, the Kaleidostic's unlimited energy, and Gil's clairvoyance, they're able to access the Star Log, all of the records in the planet's history, and they literally bring Illya back in time. It's literally a metaphysical location that you can't normally reach, and you can see this, it's a lot like space, and they literally are bringing Illya through time and stopping by certain events. First they bring her back 10 years and they see how Darius was acting towards Pandora then they bring her back a millennium, because again, Darius is at least 1,000 years old. This millennium time skip is actually when he first met Pandora and when he first started his journey in order to save her. This is when we find out about that flashback that I talked about earlier in the video. And like I mentioned before, this got skewed into him becoming the creator. And then they bring her back 5,000 more years, back to when Pandora was first actually created, and Illya meets up with her. So this would be 6,000 years ago. And the whole point of them doing all of this is that they were looking for an event that could deter that dead end from happening, or at least some clues from it, which she ends up finding from a decrepit Darius. Gil pointing out the fact that her efforts will still be useless. What a turn of events. Illya is actually one of the only two people that survived the timeline being wiped. And the only other person that was still alive, of course, was Pandora, because she can't die. Essentially, Darius had created a lost belt just like that. And that's just another play on FGO. Believe it or not, these two series were being serialized side by side, and you can see the influence. Now the thing about Pandora's box, Darius can create his own world by using the contents that's inside of it. This way he would paint the old world with the fake world that's inside the Pythos, but he has to wipe humanity first in order to do this. This bars Pandora because it's a part of her, but since Illya was still alive, since she was the last observer that was able to survive, he couldn't reach the other side. This was one of his biggest flaws in his plan. Gil and Tonica being there and Illya being able to make it out. Gil has also mentioned that the scaling on his plan is so high that he would need 2 lesser Grail equivalents and not just 1. So it wasn't just Miyu's sacrifice he needed, he needs Illya as well. Or possibly even Kuro, since she also is Illya. And so just as the manga said, he had been half a step away from reaching his goal. Just think about it. The events in Prisma Illya are so bad that they literally had to pull a Chaldea minus all of the advanced tech that they have and redo time in order to set things right. Now it's time to look at the path of Darius and Illya going forward, because we do have the statement from Angelica, who said that he never intended to save humanity. We be trying to tell these boys Prisma Illya is gas, they be sleeping.